It's very striking to see sometimes what a difference a year can make. When you look at WrestleMania 9 and then you look at WrestleMania 10, it is striking. Where the focus on WrestleMania 9 was on the pomp and the circumstance and the showmanship, it was like WrestleMania 10 was more of a focus on the nuts and bolts and the basics of making sure that you actually delivered a good show to your paying audience, both the ones that watched it via pay per view and the live crowd there at Madison Square Garden. Um, like I said, it's incredibly striking because WrestleMania 10 is definitely one of those all time great WrestleManias. I'll put it to you this way. If you had this type of event in 2014 at a WrestleMania 30, I think all parties involved with the WWE and the fans would be incredibly pleased with that and would definitely be referring to it as one of the great WrestleManias of all time. At this WrestleMania, you could see where the changes were coming. No more Hogan, and things were changing. It was time to build the next generation, that new generation for the rest of the 90s going forward. And you saw a lot of that play out here. And it felt right when watching this show. WrestleMania 10, 9 years after having WrestleMania 1 in Madison Square Garden, they come back home, so to speak. And I still think it's unfortunate that WrestleMania 30 isn't in Madison Square Garden. I think that was a bit of a mistake by the WWE, just in my opinion, anyways. I get the whole thing of WrestleMania being in a stadium every single year. Maybe the New York one should have been done this year instead of last year. That's just kind of my thought on it. But when you take a look at this show, and you were talking about what to me will always live as the greatest opening match to a pay per view in history, I will take Bret Hart versus Owen Hart, brother versus brother, in the opener of WrestleMania 10 and put that up against any opening match of any pay per view for any wrestling company in the history of the business. And this match will win. The story going into it was incredible. And sometimes it's the simple stuff. It's that kind of Cain versus Abel type of stuff, that sibling rivalry. Outstanding. And this was a predominant storyline for the WWF all throughout 1994. And they went on later on in the year and had the great match at SummerSlam '94 for the title in the cage and da 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 da. And then when you look at Bret losing to Mr. Bob Backlund at Survivor Series '94 and how that was done, a lot of good stuff done between Bret and Owen. One of my favorite feuds in the history of the professional wrestling business. But the match of matches in that feud and the biggest moment of this feud, in my opinion, was right here at WrestleMania 20. What more can you really say? This put Owen Hart on the map to me as a big time singles competitor. And, this was an example here of where somebody like a Bret Hart could have sat there and said, no, I'm wrestling for the title at the end of the show. I need to win this match here. Imagine you taking this concept or this idea to somebody like a Cena, an Orton, a Batista, a CM Punk type, and they'd all laugh at you. They'd say, no way, that makes absolutely no sense. I'm not going to sit there and job at the beginning of the show to win the belt at the end of the night. That's stupid. But Bret Hart did it. Yeah, sure, it was because of his brother, but it was also the right thing to do because you were also building up that threat that Owen could beat Bret for the title down the road. A well worked match, outstandingly well worked match, tremendous storytelling, easily one of the 10 greatest matches in WrestleMania history. And frankly, when you go throughout the history of WrestleMania, this match would put a lot of those other main events of WrestleManias to shame. And I would argue that this match here was so damn good and accomplished so much for both Bret and for Owen and set the table for even greater stuff the rest of the year that I rank this match ahead of Steamboat and Savage at WrestleMania 3 on the all time list. No question about it. So I think it did more, and I think the match just flat out was better. A testament to Owen's talent, and obviously a testament to Bret's talent. I've never been the biggest Bret the Hitman Hart fan, but I cannot deny that he was incredible. And, so right then and there, you've got a 20-minute classic to kick off your show. And a lot of other shows would sit there and fall flat on their faces after this because there's no way they could follow it up. And, you could sit there and look at the mixed tag between Bam Bam and Luna versus Doink and Dink, and you're like, eh. But it had its own comedy flair, and anything to me that Luna Vachon was ever involved in usually ended up being better than it should be. And this match here was definitely that. Even when you look at the Falls Count Anywhere match, between Randy Savage and Crush. Now, I could sit there like Tony. I know this is his least favorite WrestleMania match of all time. He says, "How dare they put Randy Savage in there with fucking Crush? This was terrible. This was god awful." I get it. However, I will say this: it is a tragedy that this was Randy Savage's last WrestleMania match. However, it was his last WrestleMania match. And I refuse to totally poon it, and I refuse to totally shun it. Because I even think of one of the promos that Macho Man cut before this match here against Crush at WrestleMania 10. It's one of those first really kind of early, you'd almost say work shoot promos. It was outstanding. And, it's a testament to me to Savage that this match could even be put on a WrestleMania card. And it is ultimately a shame that it was his last WrestleMania, but I'm not going to poon it a whole lot. Alundra Blaze defeating Leilani Kai in the women's title match was just kind of there. It was short. You kind of blinked and you missed it. One of these matches here kind of epitomizes to me where the WWE was in the mid-90s. You had Men on a Mission, Mabel and Mo, and Lord rest Mabel's soul. I know I never really talked about it that much. I was never really a big Mabel or Viscera guy, but he was a guy that had some appeal. I mean, he was just freaking ginormous. Men on the Mission was kind of a cool tag team, and the Quebecers were the Quebecers. But you look at this match, and one thing that always stands out to me, this was your tag title match on this show. And they had Johnny Polo managing the Quebecers, and he would end up going on to ECW and becoming Raven and becoming one of the great characters in wrestling during that late 90s time period. But in the WWF of the mid 1990s, he was Johnny Polo. Wow. Exactly. And that match, again, right here, this tag title match was just kind of eh. Now, you had other matches too. You had Earthquake defeating Adam Bomb, and that just kind of was what it was, and nothing more to really talk about there. But you obviously had another kind of traditional classic match. Not traditional in the type of match that it was, but traditional in the sense of what I mean is that it was historic. This ladder match for the IC title. Who's the real Intercontinental Champion between Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon? The story behind it being Shawn was gone. He had gotten busted. He got suspended. Razor became the title. Shawn had his belt. Who's the real Intercontinental Champion? You already had Owen versus Bret on this card. And that is one of the 10 greatest matches to me in WrestleMania history. And then you throw this match on the card, which was every bit as good, maybe even better depending on your personal taste. Some people have said that Shawn Michaels went out there and had a great match with the ladder, and I dispute that. I think that's kind of ridiculous. People maybe sleep on how good Scott Hall could be when he was on, and he was obviously on here. But this is a WrestleMania classic, and this was a game changer, I think, a little bit for the business at this time to see this type of match at this type of show. And they really went out there and they stole the show. It was an outstanding match. Anytime you have Owen versus Bret and Razor versus Shawn for the IC title in a ladder match on your card, you got to feel pretty good about your chances of having a good show. This match was outstanding. I think the ultimate debate, and you guys could debate this down below, is which match is better, Owen versus Bret or Razor versus Shawn, the ladder match for the IC title. Two outstanding matches featuring four great, talented performers, four Hall of Famers no matter what, period. Now, ultimately, when the other thoughts of WrestleMania 10 get turned to the world title, everybody focuses on Bret Hart working that great match with Owen to begin the show and then coming back at the end of the night and winning the belt, pulling that double duty. And I get that, and he is to be respected for that, and he is to be admired for that, because this really was Bret Hart's night. And this WrestleMania 10 show was ultimately built around the concept of establishing the fact that your two stars of the future, so to speak, even with Shawn Michaels not winning the match, you were still establishing that he was a star of the future for your company, but you were establishing that Bret Hart was going to be the brand of the WWF in 1994 and beyond. And that's how the show was structured, that's how it was put together, and that's how it was built. But I think a lot of times what gets lost in the shuffle is not the ridiculous finish to the 94 Royal Rumble where they had a tie, and both Lex Luger and Bret Hart were going to get a title match at Mania. It was the fact that Yoko wrestled almost as much as Bret Hart on this card. People always forget that, and it always aggravates me a little bit because people have selective memories. The bottom line is as much as this was Bret Hart's night in terms of him going out there and stealing the show at the beginning of the night and then coming back at the end of the night and winning the title, It was Yokozuna having two main event caliber world title matches on the same pay-per-view at almost 600 fucking pounds. I think that is something that is always underrated, always underestimated, that Yoko never gets the credit that he so richly deserves for doing. He went out there and had a credible world title match with a freaking Lex Luger in the middle of the night. Actually, later on in the middle of the night. And then he comes back maybe a little more than an hour later, if even that, and he wrestles Bret Hart, puts the title on the line again. This was his second title defense in the same night. This is something you would expect for somebody like a Shawn Michaels or a Bret Hart or some of those great workers in the history of the business. But when you talk about very good workers and great workers that were huge, Yokozuna to me fits in that category, especially in this time frame. And the fact that he was able to go out there and have two credible, legit, main event caliber, in my opinion, world title matches on this card, and at the end of the night helped establish Bret Hart as the future face of the company, to me makes this almost as much Yokozuna's show and Yoko's night as it does Bret Hart or Shawn Michaels or anybody damn else's. And that, to me, if anything, helps elevate the profile of WrestleMania 10 a little bit. Because nobody ever talks about it, and it bothers me. I don't get it. We get all caught up in the bullshit of the ladder match between Razor and Shawn, and yeah, that was great and incredible. We get all caught up in the greatness that was Owen versus Bret, brother versus brother. Just a grudge match to kick off WrestleMania, the greatest opening match to me a pay-per-view has ever had and maybe ever will have. We get all caught up in that bullshit. And all the while, we forget that Yoko not had one, but two title matches that were legit. He wrestled over 25 minutes between those two matches at almost 600 fucking pounds. And did a good job in both of them. Made it look like Luger had a chance to actually be the world champion. And then at the end of the night, he made Bret Hart look really damn good. And he put over Bret Hart well the right way. And Bret Hart became the top guy in the WWE because, in part, in my humble opinion at least, because of the epic performance that Yokozuna put on here. When I think of WrestleMania 10, I do think it's one of the 5 greatest WrestleManias of all time. Like I said, the only thing that aggravates me a little bit about it is I think sometimes the focus gets put on too much, maybe because of the WWE's propaganda over the years, on the greatness of Bret Hart and the greatness of Shawn Michaels, and we forget about that greatness of Yokozuna, and I think that's a tragedy. When I talk about what a difference a year makes between WrestleMania 9 and WrestleMania 10, you could clearly see it. And unfortunately, come 1995, you can see it again with another really, really bad WrestleMania that almost rivals WrestleMania 9 for its complete and utter suck factor, and that is WrestleMania 11.